But one of the points that I learned is a lack of self-compassion equals self-sabotage.
Welcome to part 2 of this wonderful discussion with the incredible Dr. Liz Aguirre. She's a physician, she's a speaker, and she has just completed her second TEDx talk. Thank you, Liz, for sharing your journey and your insights with us.
Lack of self-compassion equals self-sabotage, because you will sacrifice yourself and your well-being and your values and everything that brings you happiness. You will sabotage that if you don't have that self-compassion. And therefore, you will never have happiness. It's not possible because you're chasing this other thing that you think will bring you happiness. And, that's a line in my next talk. I talk about this a little bit and I say, we think that the only way to succeed is work harder. And I'm going to tell this piece from my TED Talk because I think it's really important. And that is, when I was an intern, we didn't have a work hour limit. And after my second year, at my second year of residency, the Libby-Zion law went into effect. And for those of you who are too young to know this, Libby was a college freshman who died in a New York hospital while she was being cared for by two residents who were working long hours and exhausted. And when that law came into effect, it was because the New York Health Commissioner decided to challenge the systemic problems of long work hours in residency. And at the time, there was a lot of talk about how this was impossible. There were arguments about how residents wouldn't get enough training and the patients would not get the care they needed. But all of this forgets the very reason they went into effect in the first place. And that is somebody died as a result of us continuing our training like this. And since that law went into effect, we have proven that we can practice in medicine without working 120-hour weeks. It's totally possible. And so anytime we start to think something is not possible, let's remember all the impossible things that have happened. Flying was once impossible. Electricity was once impossible. Talking to somebody on the other side of the world by holding a device to our ear was once impossible. And now we can FaceTime somebody on the other side of the world. So challenge those thoughts. And again, they feel like truths to you, but they're not necessarily the truth. The truth is there's always possibilities. And such an important point.
Yeah, you painted the image of somebody that's in that depth of despair. And when I'm reflecting back, when I was a surgical resident and I was feeling suicidal when I didn't sleep, I looked around and no one talked about it. This is 2014 to 17. No one talked about it. So my head and my mind drama was like, oh my gosh, I'm so weak. I do not deserve to be here. I'm incompetent. I can't believe I'm the only one that can't take these long hours. And I couldn't think about quitting. I would rather have died. Literally, because I saw the quitter as being the ultimate most failure at that time point. And it took one person who is a surgeon to take me aside and be like, I have those thoughts too. You're not alone. And for me to take a step back to think, well, maybe I'm not the only one, just maybe. And that small amount of space to say, maybe my thoughts aren't accurate when I am so out of my mind. And I'll look at my journals from back then. And I was like, I was so not okay. And the reason why I allowed myself to step back was it's like, I don't feel safe. And it wasn't for my own safety. It was, I want to make sure the patients are best taken care of. Yeah. And if I can't remember my own name to sign a consent form, I don't think I'm the best person in the room doing surgery for this person. And I never went into a surgery that I couldn't feel I am confident that I am safe enough to do this. But I knew that would be judged if I thought in my brain. And so people
right.
like, you had burnout times 3. When we're in that state, the best next step is to rest, get rest.
Yes.
Yes.
I talk so much about sleep that as I was writing my TED Talk, they're like, is the talk about sleep? And I'm like, oh, okay, I got to reel that back again. But I totally believe that. When you are exhausted, there's no way that you can see things rationally. And it literally is impossible. And man, I mean, just I keep saying about my TED, so I hope everybody will listen to it, but I put that fact in there that being awake for over 24 hours is the equivalent of having a blood alcohol level of 0.10%, which is above the legal level to drive in the United States. And we do this all the time, and we are taking care of patients, and their lives are at stake. And we're operating in a state in which we're the equivalent of being, in a drunk driving situation. So, yeah, sleep, I think, is absolutely the number one next step. If you are feeling in the depths of despair and you just cannot see how anything can change, then go take a nap, go to sleep. And when you wake up, your mind will be very much different.
Yeah, and I want to open this part. Says yes, you helped me with the Q&A for the TEDx talk, and we have one of your TEDx talks that's already released. And I know that you saved the big one. It was done live. The recording hasn't come out yet. We will make sure to put that in the link below. But can you share with people why you got into TEDx and why it's so important for other people to consider?
Yeah, I mean, I was in hiding for so long. I was embarrassed. I was ashamed. I thought I was the only one. And honestly, a TED Talk wasn't on my radar. I started off very small and sharing my vulnerabilities on my podcast, the Creating Clarity podcast. And I'll give you the link for that. But I started in that way. And I started doing that because once I had healed from my burnout and once I had healed, I started recognizing that the things that people said to me that I thought were just very mean when I had left clinical medicine that first time. Like, isn't it a waste? And man, thanks a lot. You're going to put a lot more on everybody else. And that's a little selfish. And, all these kind of comments. And they were very, very hurtful. And when I healed, I realized, oh, they're hurting too. This was never about me. This is always about them. And so then I started realizing if they never hear me on a stage speaking, they'll never hear my message. And so then I started the podcast. And then one day I told you this, like the thought of a TED Talk entered my mind and I ignored it. And then another situation happened where the TED thing popped in my mind and I ignored it. And then in one of my coaching programs, we had a coach come in and I was like, okay, fine, I can't ignore it anymore. But I was playing small and I was still somewhat in hiding. And I very much was in that space where, like, what if people start criticizing me? And then I came full circle and realized, this is my lived story. And if it can help anybody, then I need to share it, because right now so many people are looking at me and thinking I have it all together, and I always look great and I always look rested and I always am getting all these opportunities, and it's very far from the truth. And so my podcast and all of my talks now are sharing pieces of me to let people know where I once was and what I see now as my possibilities that I'm accepting and I'm taking. And that's available to all of you, every single one of you. And that's why the tagline to my podcast is something along the lines of uncovering the possibilities that we never thought was possible. And when you're in the depths, you don't hear it, but don't wait until you're in the depths of despair. Start looking for that help. Start looking for those coaches, because they help you see things in an objective way that you're not seeing right now. And that has absolutely been the case for me more times than I can count. And even now the fear and uncertainty always creeps in. And so I need a coach. I need a coach to help me see things differently.
And I think that's a great area to ask, how do you get enough confidence to get on the stage?
It's not necessarily confidence to get on the stage, because when I get, so the TED Talk is a perfect example, because I rehearsed that so many times that I was like, does this even matter? And my husband heard it so many times that, it didn't have the impact on him anymore. He went to my live event. He has never seen me on a stage talking. And something happens when I am on stage where I completely transform. And my only goal is looking into the eyes of someone who needs to hear my message and knowing that I need to help them. I need to change what they are feeling right now and help them see what is possible for them. And so when I get on the stage, I transform into a different human being, because it's no longer this person who is scared and what if they say this, and it becomes me being true to my message and me walking in that room to be there for the person who needs to hear me. Because like I said, I heard it so many times over the years from my husband. He was constantly trying to help me and I wouldn't hear it. And then I just started hearing it in a very subtly different way. And so I always think that maybe mine is the subtly different way that people need to hear. Because, I mean, I grew up in poverty, and I talk about this in my talks. It wasn't just like a little poverty, it was extreme poverty. And in my first talk, I talk about that. I'm driving downtown in Austin with my daughter, my kids, and I see a blue tent, and I have zero idea why I start getting really anxious and my heart starts racing and I start like freaking out a little bit. And it's my kids are asking me questions about all the homeless people, and I hadn't been there in forever, and I had no idea it was that bad. And then it hit me. This was something I had blocked out of my childhood. And that blue tent was very much like the blue tent that we lived in for a year. And it hit me like a ton of bricks. And that really was one of the early starts to recognizing that fear was driving my actions. I didn't have that awareness before. Even with coaching, I don't think I had that awareness, or I wasn't accepting it. But in that moment and seeing that, it became very clear that that stuff is living under my conscious mind, and I can't see it because I blocked it out. My husband often asks me, how come you don't remember your childhood? I don't understand that. And the answer is I blocked it out. And so after my TED talk, somebody came to talk to me. A lot of people came to talk to me and share how my message resonated with them. And one of them was a guy who grew up in poverty and doing very well for himself now, but grew up in poverty. And my husband was there with me, and he's like, you know, to be honest with you, I don't remember a lot of my childhood because I guess I don't let myself go there. And I turned to my husband and was like, you see there, babe? That's what happens. We hide from it so much so that we don't even recognize that it's there driving our actions anymore. But it is. And so it goes back to what you said about the quiet space. You have to have that space to really examine why you're making these decisions. And until you create that space and make that time to look at things and really understand why you're doing the things you're doing, the self-neglect continues, and working in the job that you absolutely can't see yourself in for another 10 years, all of that stuff continues until you create that space and allow yourself to really ask those questions.
Wow. And that is so when I was in surgery and I was at the end of it and I was so sick, I was actually inpatient in anorexia. So it was a psychiatric unit. And during one of the conversations with an individual who has now passed away, he said, you talk about yourself as if it's someone else. And that's how it felt living that experience, because I could treat myself as a patient, but I didn't connect. And I think trauma does that, or, even
Yep.
when we feel guilt or shame, we hide, and we can't hide from it forever. And I think a lot of when people have trouble sleeping, or as you mentioned, we have that something's holding us back, but we haven't yet figured out what. When I ended up not having a job at the end of in the beginning of 2021, I wasn't being paid, and I finally was forced to stop. I was applying for minimum wage job, any job, to get myself busy and to have an income, even if
Wow.
it wasn't a sustainable income, like it just something. And then I just stopped myself and I was like, this is this is this is the time that you need to face those demons that you have, the pain that you have, because I was just cycling and it was exhausting.
It's time to stop. Stop to face our fears and to stop playing small. Tune in for more. Here's what's coming up next.
When are you going to start noticing, babe? And I was like, noticing what? And he's like, I've told you this many times before, but I'm going to say it again. I wish you could see you the way I see you. And I had such little self-compassion that even though I was doing good things, and even though I was on stage, I wouldn't allow myself that. I'm like, I'm doing this for them, but they're just saying that to make me feel better. They're just saying, like, I wouldn't accept it as you're really this great.
Relate? She is really that great. And so are you. Make sure to join us in part 3 of this interview coming up next.